Good morning to all of you and greetings in the name of Christ. Near to the heart of God is what we can do because we have a high priest like we do. Welcome everyone to the service this morning. As we studied the high priest's role, I was thinking of yesterday a person was at the store and they was like, "Hey Todd, I haven't seen you for a long time." And they were all chatting. I didn't know who they were and I didn't even remember seeing them. And it was like, how do I? Well, then I didn't need to, wasn't put on the spot of what's my name or anything like that. But we have a high priest who, in spite of the billions of people, he never forgets when someone comes to him in contrition. And he knows how many hairs are on our head. He knows everything about us. So I'm glad we have a high priest like that, that we can come to. Welcome to our service today. We hear sometimes that young people and children are the future of the church, but I actually think they are the church. We're missing about all of them today. We appreciate you for coming today. A few announcements, and we'll look to Brother Dave for a message today. There's no Sunday evening service, but there is nursing home singing and Aspen Acres singing. The headache is we got really small numbers in groups A and groups B. I was talking with Caleb and some of the other ministers. What do we do? Our setup is that Group A goes to Aspen Acres, and Caleb's the leader, and Group B goes to Water's Edge. Todd Schrock is the leader. There's about 2 or 3 couples in each group that are able to go. So we're wondering, do we need to cancel, or do we have some support from the other group to make it happen? There's some more of you on your way to camping or family connections this afternoon as well, so that eliminates some more than probably what we even know about. So I guess the question is, do you know what group you're in? And are you planning on going? How many are able to attend the afternoon and we'll be able to support it as a couple? And I see your hand, so we can get a count. Okay, we got 5, 6, we got 8 people, 9 people total. Looks pretty skimpy, huh? Should we try one group or should we just cancel? Think about that for a little bit and we'll come back to that. So think about, do we want one group or should we cancel? You have to be 18 years or old to vote, right? See some children getting a word in. Wednesday evening, there's no Wednesday evening service due to being the third Wednesday. And look for men's meeting the following Wednesday evening, so a week and a half. Look for men's meeting on that day. Summer Bible School is also this week, so a busy week. Caleb, announcement for that? All right, thank you, Caleb. Thanks for spearheading that. Probably one of the most memorable times of owning the store was late when it was just about closing, and a Native American lady came in, walked around the store, and walked back out. And then came and walked around the store, and I think she walked out twice. And then I was like, is this Joshua? And how many times are we going around here? But the next time she came in, she walked up to the register and she said, "Are you from the Mennonite Church on Highway K?" And I said, "Yeah." And she said, "Well, I want you to know I went to summer Bible school in whatever year it was. And I first heard about Jesus there, and I've never left him go. So think about that as you study. It may seem like nobody got it. Oh, but somebody might. And we'll let that up to the Lord. So God bless you, teachers, as you invest. All right, coming back to, do we cancel or do we try for one group at Aspen Acres? Raise your hand if you're in favor of canceling. All right. Raise your hand if you would like to support the group and will support the group at Aspen Acres. So we got 4. Probably we should cancel on that. 3 singles and 1 couple. So I'll say if you want to go and encourage them and read some verses to them, that would be great, but we'll cancel the formal event there today. All right, a few birthdays. I have Kayla Weaver, turns 26 this week. All on the same day, all on the 22nd, these birthdays are. Joel Schrock has a birthday. Is he missing today? Okay. And how old will he turn, Eric? 15. And Sasha Hershey is turning, looks like 6 today. So she's camping today and missing as well. Well, thank you for your gift of coming, gifting us with your presence, and I trust God's Spirit can minister to your needs as we worship him today. Let's stand together for a word of prayer. Lord, I thank you for the opportunity we have to worship you today. We worship you by hearing your word and realizing the awesomeness that you have in wisdom and an understanding of who we are and how you've created us. I pray, Lord, that you would guide us in our worship today and guide Brother Dave, anoint his lips, and give him courage and boldness to share what you've laid on his heart today. And I pray that our hearts will be receptive truly to your word, that we drink at the fountain of life. In Jesus' name, amen. You may be seated.
I'd like to extend Christian greetings to each one here this morning. For a message this morning, turn with me to Matthew chapter 7. We'll be looking at verses 7 through 12 this morning in the book of Matthew, chapter 7. Now, this is a chapter of, I titled the message, Relating to Others. And this is a chapter where Jesus speaks to the people that he was ministering to here in the Sermon on the Mount about how to treat other people or how to relate to other people. He begins the chapter with, "Judge not, that ye be not judged." And he ends the chapter with what we know as verse 12 is not the ending of the chapter, but verse 12 is kind of the other bookend to "Judge not, that ye be not judged." It's therefore all things whatsoever ye would that men should do to you, do ye even so to them, for this is the law and the prophets. Sandwiched in between there are other verses that have to do with relating to each other or relating to others. Now, as I looked at this, beginning in verse 7, where he mentions the asking and the seeking and the knocking, I was always under the impression that this had to do with prayer life, with needing things from God, or needing direction, or needing blessing, or needing whatever it might be, needing things from God. And in studying this and looking at what precedes and follows these verses, and studying into it, I've come away with a little bit of a different idea about what Jesus is coming to here when he speaks about asking, seeking, and knocking. A little bit on relating to others. I'm going to go back into the Old Testament and just take a look at a few of instances in the Old Testament where people related to each other. And most of them are negative. I believe there's one or so that's positive, but most of them are negative back and forth, negative interaction. Relating to other people goes back as far as the very first family. And Adam and Eve, I'm sure, related to each other on some level. We know how Eve was tempted of the devil and related to her husband that here to have some fruit, and that was the fall of man. Cain and Abel. Abel and Cain, they brought to God their sacrifices. The one was accepted, the one was not. Jealousy got involved, envy got involved, and in the end, Cain slew his brother Abel. That's how they related to each other there. Abraham and Lot, they eventually had to separate themselves apart away so they could have a better chance of survival. Their way of relating to each other got sticky, and they had to part ways so that they could keep going on. David and Absalom was a father-son conflict. We know that Absalom gave it a good effort with a lot of the support from the people to overthrow his father's reign, his rule, to unseat King David. Joseph's life, that was a brother-to-brother conflict there again. We know the story of Joseph, how his brothers grew to resent him, to hate him, and did everything they could to get rid of him, right down to selling him as a slave, getting rid of him by selling him as a slave to another country. And Jonah's story is one that is very intriguing to me. Jonah was told by God, Prophet Jonah was told by God, to go preach to Nineveh. Now, at the time when God came to Jonah and told him, go preach to Nineveh because these people they're wicked and I'm going to destroy them if they don't turn away. This was perhaps the most successful time of the children of Israel, or that a kingdom was set up of the children of Israel. It was in the reign, I'll have to turn to the book of Jonah to get my facts straight here. But it was during the reign of Rehoboam, I think. I found it interesting that it was in a very successful time of Jonah's life, really, as a prophet. It was written before Amos, and Jonah preceded Amos and ministered under Jeroboam II, Israel's most powerful king. So it was a time when Israel was at their best. And Nineveh was the biggest city of their enemies. The two nations were conflicting. And God came to Jonah and said, hey, this nation over here, which is your enemies, this big city, these people are wicked, and I want you to go tell them because if they don't change, I'm going to destroy them. Now, I've always looked at Jonah's story as kind of one of these that, the prophet just didn't have it together. But if you put yourself in his situation, if I put myself in his situation, I'm not sure that I would have been above reasoning myself out of this. But we know the story of Jonah. So instead of going where God told him to do, he turned the other way, he got on a ship, and he was fleeing his duties. He was going the opposite way of what God wanted him to do. Big storm came up. He ends up being thrown overboard because he told the ship captain, he said, hey, I'm not doing what I'm supposed to be doing, and throw me overboard and you'll be good. They did. A whale swallows him. And it's very interesting to read Jonah's prayer from the belly of the whale. Well, we know how the story goes. God hears his prayer, the whale spits him out on dry land, and God tells him to go again, and Jonah goes. And he preaches to the people of Nineveh, and Nineveh repents, right down to the king. The king, in chapter 3, verse 7, he caused it to be proclaimed and published through Nineveh by the decree of the king and his nobles, saying, let neither man nor beast, herd nor flock taste anything, let them not feed nor drink water. The principal enemy of the nation of Israel was turning towards God. because of Jonah's message. And yet, Jonah didn't get it. I don't know how to say it any plainer. Beginning of chapter 4, it says, "But it displeased Jonah exceedingly, and he was very angry." So this is how Jonah was relating to these people. Jonah seemed like he didn't get it. He was not on par with God. It took a whale to swallow him and spit him out again to get him to go, and he still didn't get it, even though God had mercy on him. And at the end of verse 4, at the end of chapter 4, God is talking to him, and Jonah is pouting about this gourd that grew up and gave him shade while he was waiting to see the destruction of the city. And that didn't happen. This plant grew up and gave him shade, and something killed, I think a worm came along and killed the gourd, and the shade was withered away, and there he was all hot and bothered. And he was still angry at God. And God comes to him in chapter 4, and he says, "Doest thou well to be angry?" Ends the book of Jonah with God talking to him. He says, "Should I not spare Nineveh, that great city, wherein are more than 60,000 persons that cannot discern between their right hand and their left hand, and also much cattle?" God was saying, you're upset about this plant, but you don't want me to spare a great city? I found it interesting. My Bible gives the author of this book as Jonah. So I'm assuming that Jonah wrote this book as an experience that he had, and was a better prophet at some point after this than what the book portrays him to be. Just an interesting story of how one person related to other people. And we have the story of Abigail in 1 Samuel chapter 25. We know the story of Abigail. She was the wife of the man that refused to help David when he needed help. And Nabal, I think, was his name. It describes him as a churlish person. He was a very harsh person, but he was a descendant of a competitive tribe. There would have been some competition in their tribe and in David's tribe or clan or group of people or whatever for the throne of Israel. This was during during King Saul's reign that this happened. And right kind of in the middle where David had a following of people and he was running from Saul, and he came to Abigail's husband for some help. He said, hey, he sent some servants. He said, I need some things. Can you help me? And the reply was, no, not helping you. You're just running around. We have all these youngsters, these upstarts that are leaving whoever they're supposed to be following, not going there. And if you read the story, it's a reasonable excuse, in my opinion, or it could be, for him not to help David. But he comes back and David says, well, David immediately lost his temper. And he sent some people, he got his men together, and he was going back to destroy him because he didn't help him. When he meets Abigail, his wife, and she brings a peace offering, and we know how the story goes. He turns around and lets him go, and Nabal, the man that didn't help, only lived a short time after that. His heart, I think it says his heart turned to stone, and he lasted another, 2 weeks or 10 days or something, and he died. David's approach towards Saul, in the chapter just before this, was the instance where he was running from Saul, and Saul came into the cave where he was to rest, and David got a piece of his skirt. And a day or so later, David was feeling really bad about this, that he cut a piece of his skirt off. And he was very respectful to Saul at this time. This was the chapter before, and then the very next chapter, he loses his cool and he's going to destroy someone that didn't help him. I had to think, without God without allowing Christ to control our hearts or our reactions in relating to others all the time, we're susceptible to the swings, the ups and downs, just like David was there. Now we come to the current situation where in Matthew chapter 7, where Jesus is. He's teaching in the Sermon on the Mount in relating to other people. Now this is a time when the Jews were split up into 6 different categories, at least 6 different categories. There was the Pharisees. They were the strictest adherents to what was known as the Old Testament at that time. They would have been very strict in how they kept all the laws and everything, and that was their deal. They were known for that. The Sadducees were not as many as the Pharisees, but they were from more the wealthy people of the wealthy Jewish society. They believed that only the first 5 books of the Bible were truth and did not believe in the resurrection or in angels. There was the Essenes. They were a small group, around 4,000 people, and they believed that the rest of the Jews had become apostate. They believed that they were the ones that had it together. They tended to be concerned with the imminent end of the world, and much of their teaching involved the purification and living a holy lifestyle. It's interesting that some of their practices would have been very similar then to what Jesus taught as far as baptism, what the Christians adopted as baptism. When you became a Christian, you became baptized. The 4th group was the Zealots. They were a small but influential Jewish faction who believed that God would send a Messiah to overthrow the Roman rule of Judea. Many scholars believe that Simon, the Zealot, one of Jesus' disciples, belonged to this group at one time. They were an underground group, and they were known to incite uprisings against the Romans who ruled over them, and they get the credit for eventually leading leading to the incident uprising that caused the Roman siege of Jerusalem and the destruction of the temple in AD 70. And then there was the Diaspora, a diverse lot of Jews who had lived outside of the Judean landscape. These were the people that were carried away by the enemy nations of the Jews over the past how many years. And it is believed that they numbered more than the Jews that actually lived in and around what was known as Israel at one time. So it was believed that the number of Jews was actually more that lived outside than what actually lived in Judea at this time. These were largely influenced by Greek and Roman culture, much more so than the Jewish culture. And then there was the Christians, the earliest followers of Jesus Christ. And you add to this the mix of Romans who ruled over them and the soldiers and people. This is the group of people that Jesus was possibly talking to. I don't know that it was just his disciples. I think it was a large group of people. Jesus had got to the place where he had a following, and he was now talking to these people about how to get along with people. So if you think about the challenges that those people had as far as challenging individuals to get along with, different groups of people, different ways of thinking, different ways of doing things. Here comes Jesus, and he's telling them, this is how you do it. Brings us to verse 7. Ask, and it shall be given you. Seek, and ye shall find. Knock, and it shall be opened unto you. For everyone that asketh receiveth, and he that seeketh findeth, and to him that knocketh it shall be opened. Or what man is there of you whom, if his son ask bread, will he give him a stone? Or if he ask a fish, will he give him a serpent? If ye then, being evil, know how to give good gifts unto your children, how much more shall your Father which is in heaven give good things to them that ask him? Therefore all things whatsoever ye would that men should do to you, do ye even so to them, for this is the law and the prophets. Now I don't know that verse 7 and 8 are necessarily only about prayer. I don't know that it's necessarily about asking God. I think it's more of an approach we take to the other people that Jesus is talking about. Jesus is telling us how to get along with other people, how to treat other people. Ask and it shall be given you. You think about asking, you can summarize it this way. We navigate the tension of life in two kingdoms through thoughtful interaction and bold intercession. Thoughtful interaction with the people around us and bold intercession to the God who is for us. So there is an aspect where in asking we come to God, but in asking we also look around us at our fellow man and we ask them questions. We ask how they're doing, or how to help them, or why they think the way they think. When people are in close proximity to you, ask. Asking is different than forcing yourself in, is it not? Asking allows you to stand with somebody rather than against somebody. Asking isn't a debate. Asking is a communal seeking after what's true. Don't picture yourself on the other side of the line. Picture yourself with your arm right next to and around the other. Asking brings opportunity to try and understand. Asking puts you beside other people and helps you try to understand where they're coming from and why they think the way they think. The power in asking, those of us that have or have had young children know that young children can ask a lot of questions. They did a study and found out that 4-year-olds ask up to 437 questions every day. And we as parents, we kind of know how that is. You finally get to the point where after about 137 with 300 to go yet, you're like, you know what, I'm questioned out. But children know how to learn. They know that if you don't ask, how else were you to learn? John Maxwell, the great leadership guru, puts it this way: good questions inform, but great questions transform. Jesus knew this, and asking questions was something that Jesus was very apt to use in his ministry. If you were to do a study and you would look at the 4 Gospels written about Jesus' life, you would find over 300 questions that he asked. Questions like, this is to the disciples, why are you afraid? In Matthew 8:26. To Peter, who do you say that I am? In Matthew 16:15. To the disciples, do you believe? Matthew 21:22. To James and John, what do you want me to do for you? In Mark 10:36. To the rich man, why do you call me good? Luke 18:19. To John's disciples, what are you looking for? In John 1:38. To the Samaritan woman, will you give me a drink? John chapter 4, verse 7. To the woman caught in the act of adultery, who condemns you? John chapter 8, verse 10. And to a paralytic, do you want to get well? John chapter 5, verse 6. Jesus asked a lot of questions. Jesus was, if you look at Jesus' life and you read about all the interaction that he had with the poor people, with the sick people, with the disadvantaged people, Jesus was asking a lot of questions. Now think about it. How many of these questions did Jesus have the answer to? He knows all of the answers. And yet that was his way of, Jesus would ask. That was his way of helping. That was his way of making himself available. There's a saying, a phrase that I like. It says, truth imposed will never be truth received. Truth imposed will never be truth received. And I think that's largely true. Truth imposed will never be truth received. So if you come prompting people by questions, you probably have a better chance of reaching them than if you come just shoving facts and truths at people. Remember, this comes right after the verse where he says, give not that which is holy unto the dogs, nor cast your pearls before swine. And then as almost an alternative approach to that one, he says, ask. and it shall be given you. So what if we got a lot better at asking questions? Who are you? If you weren't afraid, what would you do? Maybe we need to get better at asking questions of other people. Or maybe we need to get better at asking ourselves questions. Maybe we should start by just asking what they think. Follow that up with, follow that question up with another great question. How did you come to that conclusion? Give people a chance to explain themselves and hear them out. Ask. Ask, he says. That brings it to ourselves. What do we ask ourselves? Do we ask ourselves enough questions? What if we got better at asking ourselves questions? What if we got better at asking ourselves things like, am I becoming more approachable to people? Am I becoming more aware of the people around me? Am I becoming more of a listening presence? Do I appreciate people? Do I say thank you? Who am I becoming? What if you got better at asking yourself those questions? It's one of the laws woven into this, or one of the commands that Jesus gives us here is to ask. Then he goes on to the next one. He says, seek. Now, when you think about seeking people, you think about people that are maybe not right beside you, people that are just out of reach. There's power in questions, and there's power in presence. So if you're going to seek something, you're going to go where the person is. It's easy to be preoccupied. It's easier to be preoccupied than it is to be present because it takes effort for us to seek. If you're going to seek something, you need to put some effort into it. You need to try to do this. You need to make an effort to move yourself towards. In Jesus' day, there was a dividing wall between the Jews and the Greeks. And it was the Greeks kind of ruled over them, and the Jews still kind of had their own thing, but they were very much, there was a chasm there. There was a vacuum there between them. If Jesus was here today, what would he say? What would he say is a chasm that we need to deal with, that we have? What issue would he say that we have? I think technology could probably be one of them. Our phones are often easier to spend time with than seeking a relationship or seeking someone out to speak to encourage, or to have a conversation with. You can establish a connection. One way to establish a connection with someone is just to show up. Show up at events where maybe your church is putting on an event, or a group of people that you know is putting on an event. One way to seek people out is to show up, to be there, to be present. Before you speak, show up. That's what Jesus is saying here. He says, seek. It's the way he interacts with us. When Jesus was asked what his mission was, he says in Luke chapter 19, verse 10, his mission is to seek and to save the lost. That's what Jesus came to do. And that's who we are to emulate, to seek. Finally, he says, knock. Now, when you think about knocking and relationships, you think about maybe a situation where you did seek, and maybe it's not opening. Jesus models this for us in Revelations chapter 3, verse 20. He says to the church in Laodicea, he says, behold, I stand at the door and knock. Now this was in contrast to what the Roman soldiers would do to the people that Jesus was talking to. If the Roman soldiers wanted in, they demanded hospitality. They come to your door, they could beat it down, and you had to bring them in. You had to give them food to eat and a place to stay. Jesus says, that's not the way I operate. I invite you to invite me in. What Jesus was teaching is what the Soren Kierkegaard, the great Danish philosopher, wrote years and years later. It says this: all the power in the world cannot unlock the door to the human heart. it must be opened from the inside. All the power in the world cannot unlock the human heart. It must be opened from the inside. That's why Jesus knocks. Seek, knock. Ask, seek, and knock. So that's what Jesus is saying then. We move on then into verse 9, and we look at the next part here, where he says, he makes the comparison between us as men doing this and how God does it. Or a father and a son between God our Father and us, his sons. He says in verse 9, or what man is there of you, whom if his son asks bread, will he give him a stone? Or if he asks a fish, will he give him a serpent? And you might go, wait, we know of relationships between children and fathers, maybe yours is one of them, where it's not always been a good relationship, where there's been a rocky road, where there's been things that happen that we know shouldn't happen. But that, I think, is the point. We know when things aren't right. We know what is the right, the loving response, or the expected response from a father to his son. Verse 10, or if he ask a fish, will he give him a serpent? Will he give him a serpent? And in verse 11, if ye then being evil know how to give good gifts unto your children, how much more shall your Father which is in heaven give good gifts to them that ask him? God likes to give. God is a giver. And Jesus is saying here, just like God is just like you wouldn't give your son a snake if he asked for bread, God would give you good gifts too. Now this isn't saying that God will give you everything you pray for. But I believe this passage is also about prayer. It's not just about asking and seeking and knocking in relationships. It is also about prayer. As you lean on God, you intercede with God for the relationships with man. You find yourself in the battle between the kingdom of heaven and the empire of earth. And you lean on God by asking, seeking, and knocking, and yet you use the same protocol to get along with or to treat your fellow man, to relate to your fellow man. Then he comes to verse 12, the end of this section, and he says, therefore, he says, so, in light of what I just said, therefore, all things whatsoever you would do, ye would that men should do to you, do ye even so to them, for this is the law and the prophets. See how this is a bookend to the judgment that we often lob towards people? Jesus is having one complete thought here. Instead of judging, how about you do this? In everything. Everything in this sense means whether it's sleeping or eating or going to work or hanging out in your neighborhood or going to the park, wherever you are, do to others. There's two words that Jesus could have chosen for this word others. It's the word men, that you would that men or others should do to you. The first one is adelphos, and it means brothers. It means your tribe or the people you worship with, your group of people, your brotherhood. The first one would have meant that. That was a word that was sometimes used for the word men or for others. But the one Jesus used was anthropoi. It's where we get our word anthropology. It's the idea of humanity, and that's exactly what Jesus is talking about. You've never met somebody that you were not called to love or interact with in the way that you want to be interacted with. So he's calling us here to do everything to everyone that you would have them do to you. I don't know about you, but that seems like a full-time job to me. Do everything to everyone that you would have them do to you. The Apostle Paul says in Galatians chapter 5 in verse 14, I think I'll turn to that, Galatians chapter 5 verse 14. For all the law is fulfilled in one word, even in this, thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. That pretty much sums up the entire Old Testament. That was what God wanted his people to live like. What do you want others to do to you? Okay, now go and do that to them. Jesus knows, here's what Jesus knows. He knows that we love us some us. Jesus knows what we think of us. He knows our tendencies. He knows our struggle to survive ourselves, whether it be our struggle to have our pride survive, or our struggle to have our image survive, or a struggle for just plain survival. Jesus knows that. We love ourselves. He's not saying that's not necessarily wrong all the time. What he's saying is you typically know how you would want to be treated in that situation, and now your goal is to treat others in the same way you wish you were treated. So how would you want to be treated at work? 95% of leaders say they prefer to be asked questions rather than told what to do. But 50% of the time they give instructions. How do you want to be treated? Going back to verse 14 in Galatians 5, if you go one more verse, it says, "But if ye bite and devour one another, take heed that ye be not consumed one of another." As I started with the different examples in the Old Testament about Cain, about Absalom, about Nabal, but if ye bite and devour one another. You know, we would never do that, right? We would never bite or devour anybody. But how about when we take a little bite out of someone's reputation, or we take a little snap at someone because they didn't quite treat us the way we wanted to? Or we gossip just a little bit, we take a little bite out of someone here or there because they did something that we thought was stupid. A challenge for me is to love thy neighbor as thyself in verse 14. I think it's one of those things that with God's help, we can strive for perfection in that. And I think God desires his followers to be that way. He desires us to treat other people the way that we would like to be treated. In closing, let me give you one question. All of us probably have a situation in our life right now with relationships that God has blessed us with and given us. One thing going on where we have a conflict with somebody. Who might it be? Some of us may have more than one. Some of us know maybe exactly which one would come to mind first. Some of us might have to think a little bit. Let's lay this Jesus way over that question. How would you want them to respond to you? What would you want them to do? What would you want them to say? When we choose love, we imitate our Father in heaven, and we love because he first loved us. Let's kneel for a word of prayer. Father, we come before you this noon hour. We thank you for this day that you have blessed us with. We thank you for your word that we can look into. We thank you for the instruction that you give us. We thank you for teaching us the better way. We thank you for being that high priest who gave the better way. We thank you for giving us your Holy Spirit to help us live our lives in this better way. And we just pray for that power today. We pray for that insight for our lives, for the situation we find ourselves in. Just pray for that awareness that we would have, that when we're faced with a decision, a snap decision that we have to make, or when we have time to think about things, that we would allow your Spirit to guide us in the decisions that we make, and that we would strive to be the kind of perfect individuals, strive for perfection each day in our relationships with each other. We ask these favors and blessings in your name according to your will. Amen.